The crystalline spires of Vidian colony clawed at the violet sky like frozen lightning, their surfaces etched with flowing runes that pulsed in rhythm with the colony's artificial heartbeat. Twin suns bled amethyst shadows across chrome boulevards where anti-gravity skimmers whispered past in perfect formation. The air shimmered with particles of synthesized oxygen, carrying the faint metallic tang of recycled ambition and the subtle perfume of engineered blossoms that bloomed only under artificial light. Every breath tasted like possibility wrapped in ozone. Lyra sat motionless in her mobility chair, its anti-gravity pads glowing a soft cerulean as they cradled her above the polished obsidian floor of the departure terminal. Through transparent walls that curved like the inside of a soap bubble, she watched the brides-to-be glide past in ceremonial gowns woven from liquid silver and nebula silk that caught the light and fractured it into rainbows. Their laughter echoed like wind chimes caught in a hurricane she could never hope to weather. Red rejection letters pulsed in her neural interface like fresh wounds that refused to scab over. Each one carried the same sterile message: compatibility insufficient. Physical parameters do not meet minimum requirements. Paralyzed since birth in Aquaria's gentle low-gravity embrace, where bodies evolved to dance through air rather than walk upon ground, she had been rendered invisible to every prospective mate in the intergalactic marriage registry. The registry that spans 73 worlds and cataloged genetic perfection like rare gems. Everyone except him. And what this widowed father with a grieving daughter would do next would not just bend the rules of Vidian colony, it would shatter them into stardust. Before we start, subscribe now so you don't miss more incredible stories like this one. Oh, and before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where are you watching this video from? We love hearing from you and always read every message. Your location might just become part of the next tale. The Vidian marriage registry crowned the tallest spire, a cathedral of glass and light where holographic profiles rotated like planets around a sun. Lyra had been displayed in the least visible corner for 2 standard years, her image flickering weakly like a candle in a storm. The corner where the light didn't quite reach, where prospective grooms never lingered. She wheeled herself through the morning crowd, her chair's anti-gravity pads humming a soft lullaby that only she could hear. Tall Arcturians with skin like molten silver brushed past without a glance. Wealthy Terran merchants in suits tailored from smart fabric that shifted colors with their mood flicked dismissive eyes over her profile and moved on. None of them saw her. "Another viewing session, dear?" Administrator Velk asked without looking up from her datapad. Her 3 eyes blinked in sequence, a Vidian tell for mild annoyance. "You know the statistics. Profile 327, 4 accesses this month. 0 introduction requests. The algorithm doesn't lie." The morning auction was about to begin. Holographic projections of brides rotated slowly above the central dais, each accompanied by cascading data, genetic compatibility scores that glowed green for perfection, cultural adaptability ratings measured in star systems, physical capability indices that never dipped below 90%. Lot 47, Seraphina of Centauri, 6. Genetic health score, 94. No physical limitations. Mobility, full bipedal and 0 gravity capable. Bidding began immediately, voices rising in a fevered chant that climbed into hundreds of thousands of credits, then millions. The numbers scrolled like a waterfall of wealth. Lyra watched from her position near the exit archway, where the light from the twin suns painted violet stripes across the floor. She had long ago stopped hoping to be called to the main floor. Her profile didn't even appear in the auction rotation anymore. She was a relic, a cautionary tale displayed for tax purposes. "Look, it's the broken doll again." The voice cut through her thoughts like a vibroblade through silk. Dexter stood near the refreshment station, his green Vidian skin gleaming with expensive bioenhancements. Each scale was edged in gold nanoparticles that caught the light and threw it back in tiny explosions of wealth. His friends, 3 other Vidians in matching ostentatious attire, laughed on cue. Still waiting for your prince, Lyra? Maybe he'll come riding in on a miracle cure. Or maybe he'll just need someone to polish his floors and warm his bed without the inconvenience of walking. Lyra activated her chair's forward movement, the pads humming louder as she intended to leave. But Dexter stepped deliberately into her path, his bulk blocking the exit like a living wall. Running away. That's all you can do, isn't it? He crouched to her eye level, his breath hot with the synthetic mint of upper-class indulgence. You know what your real value is. The registry keeps you here as a tax write-off. Charity case. A reminder to the rest of us how lucky we are to be perfect. Move. Lyra's voice was quiet steel. Or what? Dexter's smile was all teeth. Listen, broken thing. Tomorrow I'm buying Celestine of Andromeda. Pure bloodline, perfect body, legs that actually work, everything you'll never be. Excuse me. The voice came from behind Dexter, quiet but carrying the weight of a freighter's hull plating. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the amphitheater's noise like a laser through fog. A human stood there. A Terran in working-class clothing that had seen better days. Faded navy jumpsuit with patches on the knees, scuffed boots that had walked 1,000 docking bays. A small girl clutched his hand, her dark curls tied with a ribbon that had once been red but was now sun-bleached pink. The man's dark hair was touched with gray at the temples, his eyes carrying the deep weariness that came only from loss carved into the soul. "You're blocking the lady's path," the man said simply. His voice had the rough edge of someone who worked with his hands, who fixed things that broke in the void between stars. Dexter straightened slowly, his face flushing a darker green that bordered on black. "This doesn't concern you, human. It concerns me if you're being discourteous. Please move." The amphitheater went quiet as suddenly as if someone had flipped a switch. Humans were rare in Vidian colony, tolerated as necessary for trade, but considered beneath notice in social circles. They were the ones who piloted the freighters, repaired the engines, cleaned the docks. Not the ones who bought brides from 73 worlds. "Do you know who I am?" Dexter's voice rose, attracting more attention. "My family controls 3 mining planets in the Outer Rim. We own half the helium-3 refineries in this sector." "Dad," the little girl whispered, tugging his hand with both of hers. Her eyes, big and brown and ancient with grief, were fixed on Lyra. "Is the blue lady okay?" She looked sad. The man looked down at his daughter, his expression softening for a fraction of a second. Then he looked at Lyra. Their eyes met across the space between them, and in that moment, Lyra saw something she hadn't seen directed at her in years. Simple human recognition. Not pity. Not calculation of worth. Just acknowledgement that she was there. That she was real. That she mattered. "She will be," he said to his daughter. Then to Dexter, his voice hardening, "Last chance. Move." Dexter laughed, a sound like breaking crystal. "You think you can threaten me? You think you can?" The human had already pulled out a data chip, small and unremarkable, holding it up where Administrator Velk could see it clearly. "I'm here to register a formal courtship request for viewing slot 327. That was Lyra's designation number. The one that had gathered digital dust for 2 years. The amphitheater erupted in whispers that spread like ripples in a pond. Someone dropped a crystal goblet. It shattered on the marble floor with a sound like gunfire. "Sir, that profile is..." Velk began, her 3 eyes blinking rapidly. "Perhaps you've made an error," Dexter sputtered, his gold-edged scales dimming with shock. "No error." The human's voice was calm, steady. "I'm requesting formal introduction to Lyra of Aquaria. Today. Now." Lyra's breath caught in her throat. In 2 years, no one had requested an introduction. Not once. Her profile had been viewed 4 times this month. 3 by medical students writing papers on genetic anomalies. 1 by a journalist looking for a sob story. 0 courtship requests. "This is a joke," Dexter said, but his voice had lost its edge. "You can't possibly." "I have 20,000 credits as the standard introduction fee." The human recited the requirements like he'd memorized them. "My genetic profile is on file with Terran Medical Authority. I'm employed as a senior freighter pilot with Thorn Transport. I own my vessel outright, the Stellar Drift, registry number TX 4472. No criminal record. No outstanding debts. I believe that meets your requirements." Velk scrolled frantically through her data pad, her scales rippling with discomfort. "This is highly irregular, Mr. Aldrich Thorn." He supplied his name without flourish. "And this is my daughter, Emma." The little girl waved shyly at Lyra, her small hand barely leaving her father's grip. Lyra found herself waving back before she could stop herself. "Mr. Thorn," Velk said carefully, "perhaps you're unaware of the specific challenges associated with Profile 327. The physical limitations are quite severe." "I can read." Aldrich's interruption was polite but firm. "I read her entire profile 3 times. Including the medical attachments, the genetic reports, the cultural compatibility assessments. And I'm not interested in anyone else." Lyra found her voice, small as it was. "Why?" Aldrich turned to her fully, as if the rest of the amphitheater had ceased to exist. "Because Emma's mother died a year ago. Before she passed, she made me promise something. She said, find someone who knows what it's like to be invisible. Find someone who understands that love isn't about perfection. It's about seeing the person everyone else overlooks." His voice cracked slightly on the last word, but he didn't look away. "I've been searching every registry in this sector for a year. I found women with perfect genetic scores. Women who could walk on any planet, dance in zero gravity, bear children without complication. Women who looked good on paper. Not one of them mentioned volunteering to translate for refugees who couldn't afford interpreters. Not one mentioned teaching themselves 17 languages just because they wanted to understand people better. Not one had written about wanting to help others more than they wanted to be helped." He paused, and the silence in the hall was absolute. "When I saw your profile, when I read what you'd done despite everything, that's when I knew my wife had been right. The best people are usually the ones no one's looking at." The hall hung on every word. Even Dexter had gone still, his gold scales no longer catching the light. Then Velk's datapad began flashing red, a priority alert from the Colonial Council. The sound it made was the same one used for emergency evacuations. "Mr. Thorn," Velk said, her voice suddenly formal, "I'm going to need you to come to my office privately. Immediately." "Whatever needs to be discussed can be discussed here," Aldrich replied, not moving from his protective position near Lyra's chair. He had angled himself slightly, placing his body between her and Dexter without seeming to think about it. Velk's scales rippled in patterns that Lyra recognized as extreme discomfort. "I really must insist. And I must insist on transparency." Aldrich's voice could have cut steel. "I filed a formal request according to all published regulations. Is there a legal reason it cannot proceed?" The administrator's 3 eyes blinked in complex patterns that Lyra's linguistic training recognized as the Vidian equivalent of panic. "The Colonial Council has special provisions regarding Profile 327. "What provisions?" Lyra asked, her voice stronger now than it had been in years. Velk wouldn't meet her eyes. "The Aquarian Embassy submitted a formal request 2 years ago. Any courtship of you requires their explicit approval. They claim custodial rights due to your status as a ward of the state. My status? Lyra's chair hummed as she moved forward slightly. I'm 24 standard years old. I'm not a child. No, Velk admitted, but you're classified as a genetic anomaly requiring cultural protection. The embassy's position is that allowing you to marry off-world would be a poor reflection on Aquarian genetic standards. It would suggest that our species produces imperfections. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Aldrich's jaw tightened until Lyra could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. They're blocking her from getting married because she makes them look bad, he said flatly. It's more complicated than... No, Aldrich cut in, it really isn't. They've trapped her here. Put her in the registry where she'll be rejected over and over because of her legs, but won't let her actually leave with someone who sees past them. She's not a person to them. She's an embarrassment they want to hide in plain sight. Lyra felt something crack inside her chest, a soundless fracture that had been building for years. Hearing it said aloud by someone who had no reason to care, it made it real in a way nothing else ever had. There must be an appeal process, Aldrich said. There is. Velk's voice was barely above a whisper. You can formally challenge the custodial claim. It would require a hearing before the embassy's Council of Genetic Standards. Fine. Request the hearing. Mr. Thorne, Velk's scales were now rippling so violently they created visible waves across her neck. These hearings can take months, sometimes years. The embassy has never, not once, granted independence to someone they've classified as requiring protection. They have legal resources that span star systems. They will bury you in paperwork until you give up. There's a first time for everything. Aldrich. Lyra's voice stopped him. She had wheeled herself forward until she was directly beside him, close enough to see the flecks of gold in his tired eyes. You don't want this fight. The embassy has resources you can't imagine. They'll make your life hell and they'll win. They always win. Let them try. Why? The question came out raw, stripped of all pretense. Why would you do this? You don't even know me. Aldrich knelt slowly, bringing himself to her eye level. The movement was careful, deliberate, as if he understood that sudden motions might startle her. Emma, he said softly, tell Lyra what Mommy used to say about dragons. The little girl stepped forward, letting go of her father's hand for the first time. She was small enough that she had to crane her neck to look up at Lyra, but her eyes were steady. Mommy said that dragons guarded treasures. But the real treasure wasn't gold or jewels. It was the people everyone else was too scared to see. And brave knights didn't kill dragons. They made friends with them and found the treasure together. Aldrich smiled, but it was a sad smile, the kind that carried memories too heavy for one lifetime. My wife was a geneticist. She spent her life studying variations, adaptations, the ways biology finds to surprise us. She was right about people too. The best ones are always guarded by dragons. Fear, prejudice, bureaucracy, whatever form they take. But that doesn't mean they're not worth finding. He reached out slowly, giving Lyra time to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. His hand was calloused from years of working ship controls, scarred from maintenance accidents in 0G. A working man's hand. Real in a way nothing in Vidian Colony ever was. I spent a year searching profiles, he continued. I found dozens of women who were perfect on paper. Not one of them mentioned volunteering. Not one mentioned learning languages for fun. Not one had written about wanting to help others more than they wanted to be helped. You're the only one who did. And if I have to fight an entire embassy to prove that matters more than genetics, then that's what I'll do. You'll lose everything, Lyra whispered. Your savings. Your ship. Your reputation. Everything. Maybe. Aldrich didn't look away. Or maybe we'll win. Either way, Emma will learn that some things are worth fighting for. That love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone worth being imperfect with. Lyra looked at his hand, then at Emma's small face, then at the sea of faces in the amphitheater that had gone from mockery to something else entirely. She took his hand. Her own was trembling, but she held on. "All right," she said. "Let's fight, dragons." Velk sighed, a sound like air escaping a punctured hull. "I'll submit the formal challenge. But Mr. Thorne, you should know, the embassy will assign you an opposition advocate whose sole job is to prove you're unfit. They'll dig into every aspect of your life. Your finances. Your parenting. Your ship's maintenance records. Everything." "Who will they send?" Aldrich asked. Velk's scales went very still. "Ambassador, then. He's never lost a case. Ever." The name landed between them like a meteor strike. Lyra felt the blood drain from her face. No one believed they would even try. But the document Velk generated carried with it a clause that no one had noticed. A small, innocuous line about expedited emergency hearings in cases of potential genetic discrimination. A clause that would change everything in exactly 72 hours. The news spread through Vidian Colony like a plasma fire in the ventilation system. By evening, every data sphere buzzed with the story. Human challenges Aquarian embassy for custody of disabled bride. Genetic purity versus human decency. The trial that could change everything. 20,000 credits says the embassy wins in under a week. Aldrich's apartment became a fortress under siege. News drones circled like vultures, their cameras whirring as they tried to get shots through the polarized windows. His communication consoles flooded with messages, some supportive, most hostile. He ignored them all, sitting at the small kitchen table that doubled as homework station and dining area, helping Emma sound out words in her beginner's reader while Lyra watched the twin suns set from the window. The apartment was small by colony standards. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a combined living/kitchen area that smelled faintly of engine grease and children's crayons. The walls were decorated with Emma's drawings, spaceships and stars, and a stick figure family that now had 3 people instead of 2. Lyra's chair fit neatly in the corner by the window, where she could see the spires glowing against the darkening sky. She accessed the public data sphere through her neural interface, watching the conversation evolve in real time. User_StarPilot42. This human is either the stupidest or bravest person in the sector. User_genetic truth. Finally, someone standing up to genetic purism. About time. User_credit better. 20 credits says embassy wins in under a week. Any takers? User_refugee voice. Lyra translated for my family when we arrived with nothing. She saved us. #FreeLyra. User_Vidian pride. Humans should stick to their own kind. This is cultural contamination. You should read this, Lyra said quietly, projecting the feed onto the wall screen. I know what they're saying. Aldrich didn't look up from helping Emma with her spelling. Let them talk. They're saying you're using me. That I'm a charity case. That you'll abandon me once you realize what caring for someone like me actually requires. The medical equipment. The adaptations. The time. He set down Emma's homework pad and turned to face her fully. Are you having second thoughts? Lyra was silent for a long moment. Through the window, she could see the colony's twin suns setting in a spectacle of violet and gold, painting the spires in colors that didn't exist on any natural world. She had watched those suns set alone for 2 years, from various windows in various registry-approved housing units. Always alone. I've been alone a long time, she said finally. I've gotten used to expecting nothing. To building walls so high that hope couldn't climb over them. And now you're here, making me hope for things I'd trained myself not to want. A family. A future. Someone who sees me. So yes, I'm terrified. Good, Aldrich said. Because I'm terrified too. I'm a freighter pilot, not a lawyer. I fix engines, not embassies. But Emma deserves a mother who understands what it's like to hurt and keep going anyway. You deserve a family that sees your worth. And I deserve to keep the promise I made to my dying wife. So we're going to try. Miss Lyra. Emma had been watching them with the serious expression only children can manage. Are you going to be my mom? The question hung in the air like a held breath. Aldrich started to intervene. Lyra could see it in the way his mouth opened, but she raised a hand to stop him. I don't know, Emma, she said honestly. That's a big word. A big promise. Would you want that? Emma considered this with the gravity of a diplomat. Daddy says you're really smart and brave and you have a cool chair that floats. Can I ask you something important? Anything. Does it hurt not being able to walk? Emma, Aldrich began warningly. It's okay, Lyra said. She wheeled herself closer to the little girl, close enough that Emma could see the faint scars on her legs where medical probes had been inserted over the years. Sometimes. Not the way you might think. My legs don't hurt, there's no feeling there at all. But my heart does sometimes. When people stare at me like I'm broken. When they decide I'm not good enough without ever talking to me. When they look at my chair instead of my eyes. That hurts more than anything physical. Emma nodded slowly, processing this with the intensity of a child who had learned too early about different kinds of pain. My heart hurts too since Mommy died. It feels like there's a big hole where she used to be. So maybe if your heart hurts and my heart hurts, we could hurt together and maybe it would hurt less. Like sharing. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She had translated for refugees from war-torn worlds, had learned 17 languages to bridge gaps between species that had never met before. But no one had ever spoken to her with such simple, devastating honesty. Yeah, she managed. Maybe it would. A chime interrupted the moment, Aldrich's console flashing with the Vidian Colonial Authority seal. His face went pale as he read the message aloud. The hearing has been scheduled 72 hours from now. And they've made it public. Live broadcast across all colony channels. They're turning it into a spectacle. Lyra felt the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. They want to make an example of us. Show what happens when you challenge the system. There's something else you should know, she said softly. Ambassador then, he's my uncle. The words landed between them like stones dropped into still water. You're what? Aldrich's voice was carefully neutral. My mother's brother. He's the one who had me classified as requiring protection in the first place. He's not just the embassy's prosecutor. He's personally invested in keeping me here. In keeping me contained. That night, as the twin suns rose again in their artificial cycle, a message arrived with the official embassy seal. It was addressed to Aldrich, but Lyra read it over his shoulder, her reflection ghosting across the screen. Mr. Thorne, your petition has been reviewed by the appropriate committees. However, I feel compelled to warn you personally. What you are attempting is not only futile, but potentially harmful to my niece. Lyra's condition represents fundamental genetic incompatibility with standard Aquarian biology. Our species evolved in zero-gravity environments where physical mobility through air currents is essential for survival. Lyra cannot do this. She requires constant medical intervention, specialized equipment, and environmental controls that do not exist outside Aquarian-controlled spaces. I have known my niece since birth. I held her when she was minutes old, watched her grow despite her limitations. I will prove at the hearing that your petition, however well-intentioned, is based on ignorance of the practical realities of her care. The romantic notion of love conquering all does not account for the daily realities of medical equipment maintenance, the financial burden of adaptive technologies, the emotional toll on any children involved. I suggest you withdraw your petition and spare us all this spectacle. Lyra deserves better than to be a test case for human sentimentality. Ambassador, then. Lyra read it twice, her reflection in the screen growing paler with each pass. He's not wrong about everything. I do have limitations. Caring for me will be complicated. The chair needs weekly calibration. I can't regulate my body temperature in standard gravity without assistance. There are medications, therapies. I'm not looking for easy. Aldrich's voice was rough with exhaustion but steady. Living is not easy. Raising a child alone after losing your wife is not easy. Keeping a freighter running on routes that take you away for weeks at a time is not easy. But we do it anyway because the alternative is worse. He turned to face her fully. The alternative is giving up. Accepting that some people don't deserve love because they're inconvenient. Deciding that genetic perfection matters more than being a good person. Your uncle wants to protect you from risk. But he's really protecting the embassy from embarrassment. And that's not love. That's control. Lyra looked at the message again, at the clinical language that reduced her life to bullet points and risk assessments. She thought of the years spent in registry housing, the carefully neutral decor that never quite felt like home, the scheduled social workers who checked boxes instead of asking how she felt. You're right, she said finally. It's control. Just when everyone thought they would break under the weight of the embassy's power, when the data spheres were filled with betting pools on how quickly the human would fold, someone accessed the public channels from an anonymous account and released a document that no one expected. Lyra's original genetic classification report, filed 22 years ago by Dr. Nexia of the Aquarian Research Institute. The report that had been buried under layers of classification and redactions. And buried in the appendix, in language so technical it had been ignored by everyone except specialists, was a note that changed everything. Subject displays abnormal neural development. Cognitive processing exceeds projected baseline by 340%. Synaptic density in language centers 400% above norm. Recommend immediate longitudinal study for potential adaptive advantages. This is not a defect. This is evolution finding a new path. The embassy had known for 22 years that Lyra wasn't genetically inferior. She was genetically advanced. A mutation that sacrificed physical mobility for cognitive enhancement on a scale never seen before. And they'd buried it to protect their perfect genetic models. The judicial chamber had never held so many people. Every seat was filled, representatives from a dozen species packed shoulder to shoulder. Media drones hovered like mechanical insects, their lenses whirring as they captured every angle. Outside, protesters filled the plaza, holding signs in 17 languages, genetic freedom. Choice, not custody. Loved it. The chamber itself was a perfect sphere, designed for zero-gravity proceedings. Officials floated in transparent pods. Observers sat in tiered seating that curved around the central dais. Lyra entered wearing traditional Aquarian ceremonial attire, flowing robes of deep indigo that left her paralyzed legs visible. A deliberate statement, she would not hide. Her chair had been modified for the zero-G environment, its pads now propelling her through the air with gentle pulses. Ambassador then was already positioned at the prosecution platform, wearing full diplomatic regalia that shimmered with embedded data threads. When his eyes met Lyra's across the chamber, something flickered in them. Recognition, perhaps, or the ghost of guilt. The council filed in, 3 judges representing the Galactic Legal Authority, 2 embassy representatives, and Administrator Velk who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Chief Justice Kale, a crystalline being whose body refracted light into prismatic patterns that shifted with their thoughts, activated the recording systems with a gesture. We are convened to address petition DH 4472, Aldrich Thorne versus the Aquarian Embassy, regarding the custodial status of Lyra of Aquaria. This hearing is being broadcast live across all colony channels and select Interstellar networks. Ambassador, then, your opening statement. Then rose with the fluid grace of someone born to zero gravity, his movements carrying centuries of legal tradition. Honored counsel, esteemed observers, we are here because a well-meaning but tragically misguided individual has challenged a system designed to protect the most vulnerable members of our society. Mr. Thorne believes he is rescuing my niece from some imagined oppression. In reality, he is exposing her to dangers he cannot possibly comprehend. He activated holographic displays that filled the chamber, medical charts detailing Lyra's condition in clinical detail, genetic sequences that highlighted her mutations in glaring red, mobility assessments that showed her complete dependence on assistive technology. Lyra of Aquaria was born with a genetic variation that rendered her unable to function in standard Aquarian environments. Our species evolved in zero gravity, where we swim through air currents as naturally as fish through water. Lyra cannot do this. Her condition is fundamentally incompatible with our species' basic environmental requirements. The display shifted to show Aquarian cities, breathtaking structures suspended in zero gravity, beings gliding through air in complex dance patterns that served as both transportation and social interaction. The embassy classified her as requiring protection because without specialized accommodation, she cannot survive in our home world. She cannot participate in our most basic cultural practices. She cannot even breathe properly without mechanical assistance in standard gravity. He turned to face Aldrich directly. And Mr. Thorne cannot provide those accommodations. He has no medical training. His financial resources are limited to the proceeds of a single freighter vessel. He lives in a ground-based apartment designed for bipedal terrestrial species, with standard gravity and no zero-G facilities. The display shifted again to show Aldrich's apartment, somehow obtained through public records, small, utilitarian, clearly lived in by someone who spent more time in space than at home. The embassy has provided Lyra with lifetime medical support, housing adapted to her needs with full zero-G capability, comprehensive care plans that anticipate every possible complication. Mr. Thorne offers a 2-bedroom apartment in an industrial sector, employment as a freighter pilot with unpredictable hours that could leave Lyra alone for weeks at a time, and a 6-year-old child who would inevitably resent the attention diverted from her own needs. It was devastating. Built entirely on practical reality, no emotion, no cruelty, just facts presented with the cold precision of a scalpel. I ask the council to consider what happens after the romantic gesture fades. When Mr. Thorne realizes that caring for Lyra requires constant adaptation, modifying his ship, his home, his schedule. When his daughter begins to resent the medical equipment that takes up half their living space. When Lyra herself confronts the reality that love cannot overcome biological limitation, that there are things she will never be able to do with her partner, experiences she will never share. He sat down, and the silence in the chamber was absolute. Chief Justice Cale's prismatic form shifted to a deep amber, contemplation. Mr. Thorne, your response. Aldrich stood in his simple working-class clothing, the same jumpsuit he'd worn to the registry. He had refused the embassy's offer of formal attire. Honored counsel, ambassador then is right about a lot of things. I'm not rich. I don't have medical training beyond basic first aid. I work long hours on routes that take me away for weeks. My apartment is small. Caring for Lyra will be complicated, expensive, and sometimes inconvenient. But he's wrong about what matters. He activated his own display, simple text files that appeared almost crude compared to the embassy's holograms. This is Lyra's volunteer record. 3 years translating for refugees at the spaceport. Not because she was paid, refugees rarely have credits to spare. Because she saw people suffering in silence and decided to give them voices. The text scrolled to show testimonials. Lyra stayed with my children for 6 hours while I was in medical triage. She taught them Aquarian lullabies in their own language. She translated my husband's dying words so I could understand them. I will never forget her kindness. This is her thesis on interspecies communication, Aldrich continued. Written when she was 19. Rejected by 3 academic journals not because it was wrong, but because the review boards decided someone with her physical profile couldn't possibly have written something so insightful. They assumed it was ghostwritten. It wasn't. More documents, linguistic certifications in 17 languages, all self-taught through public datasphere courses. Records of her helping to negotiate trade agreements between species that had been at war for generations. Ambassador then wants you to focus on what Lyra can't do, Aldrich said. I want you to see what she has done against every obstacle thrown in her path. She didn't just survive, she excelled. She built a life of meaning despite a system designed to keep her small. The genetic report proves I'm not defective, Lyra suddenly spoke, wheeling herself forward into the center of the chamber. Her voice carried through the zero-G space with perfect clarity. Dr. Nexia's original research, the research the embassy suppressed, proves they buried the truth about my potential. And my own accomplishments prove I'm capable of determining my own path. An elderly Aquarian female stood from the gallery, her zero-G robes flowing around her like water. I'm Dr. Nexia, senior geneticist, retired from the Aquarian Research Institute. I filed the original report on Lyra when she was 2 days old, and I have documentation proving the embassy suppressed my findings for 22 years. The chamber exploded into chaos. Dr. Nexia made her way to the witness platform with the determination of someone who had waited decades for this moment. She carried a data chip that gleamed with official seals. 22 years ago, she began, inserting the chip into the central display, I discovered that Lyra's genetic variation was not a flaw, but an adaptation. Her paralysis is the trade-off for neural development that exceeds anything in recorded Aquarian history. I recommended immediate study to understand how her brain processes information, how she learned languages with native fluency in months instead of years. Documents flooded the displays. Decades of suppressed research, internal communications between embassy officials. Subject shows potential for paradigm-shifting cognitive abilities. Recommend reclassification. Request denied, would undermine genetic purity initiatives. They didn't protect Lyra, Dr. Nexia said. They protected themselves from questions about what happens when their genetic models failed to predict reality. When evolution found a path they didn't approve of. And then the final revelation, buried in a footnote of a footnote. Dr. Sarah Thorne, Aldrich's deceased wife, had been part of the original research team 20 years ago, before her illness forced retirement. She had been the one to first identify the cognitive enhancement markers. She hadn't just inspired Aldrich's search. She'd been part of the investigation into Lyra's condition all along, had followed her case from afar even as her own health failed. The chamber went deathly quiet. After an hour of deliberation, during which the data spheres outside exploded with speculation, the council reconvened. The crowd had grown impossibly larger, protesters now filling 3 levels of the plaza. Someone had started projecting Lyra's volunteer testimonials onto the embassy building itself. Chief Justice Cale's crystalline form had settled into a deep, steady blue, the color of final judgment. This council has completed its deliberation. Before we deliver our ruling, we wish to address several matters of galactic import. The chamber held its breath. First, Dr. Nexia's documentation has been entered into evidence and verified by 3 independent genetic authorities. We recommend full investigation into the Aquarian Embassy's research suppression practices, with potential sanctions up to and including dissolution of their genetic classification authority. Second, the interspecies genetic classification system will be subject to immediate independent review by the Galactic Science Council, with mandatory transparency protocols. Third, Ambassador then will be formally censured for failure to disclose material information regarding his personal relationship to the petitioner and his role in the original classification decision. Then's face remained impassive, but his scales had darkened to an unhealthy gray. However, Cale continued, these administrative matters do not resolve the central question before us, whether Lyra of Aquaria should be released from embassy custodial status and recognized as a fully autonomous adult. Lyra gripped her armrests so hard her knuckles went white. Aldrich moved to float beside her, his hand finding hers in the 0G space. This case has required us to balance competing principles. Individual liberty versus institutional responsibility. The right of self-determination versus the duty to protect. Normally, we defer to specialist institutions with established expertise. Lyra felt her hope beginning to crack, piece by careful piece. However, this case presents extraordinary circumstances that demand we look beyond precedent. The systematic suppression of research spanning decades. The buried evidence of cognitive enhancement on a scale never before documented. The systematic denial of opportunities based not on capability but on appearance. And most significantly, the testimony of the petitioner herself, demonstrating cognitive capability that exceeds species norm by multiple standard deviations in every measurable category. Cale paused, their prismatic form shifting to a brilliant gold. Therefore, this council rules as follows. The custodial status imposed by the Aquarian Embassy is hereby dissolved, effective immediately. Lyra of Aquaria is recognized as a fully autonomous adult with all rights and responsibilities thereto appertaining. The Embassy is permanently enjoined from imposing future classifications without comprehensive independent evidence reviewed by no fewer than 3 unaffiliated genetic authorities. Lyra of Aquaria is free to accept or reject the marriage petition of Aldrich Thorne as she sees fit, without embassy interference or approval. The chamber exploded into sound. Reporters rushed forward, drones whirring wildly. Protesters outside erupted in cheers that shook the transparent walls. Dr. Nexia was openly crying, her 0G tears floating like perfect spheres. Emma was jumping up and down in her father's arms, screaming with joy. Lyra and Aldrich remained still in the center of the chaos, looking at each other in shock and disbelief. The judgment hung in the air between them like a living thing. "We won," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. "We won," Aldrich confirmed, and then they were both crying, holding each other in the 0G space while Emma climbed onto Lyra's lap and joined the embrace, her small arms trying to wrap around both of them at once. 3 days later, they stood in a small chapel at the colony's edge, far from the spires and the media and the protesters. No cameras, no drones. Just Dr. Nexia as witness, a simple officiant who had married freighter pilots for decades, and a family being born in the quiet between heartbeats. The chapel was built into the side of a cliff, its walls transparent to show the gas giant that dominated the sky, its rings casting shifting shadows across the floor. Lyra's chair had been decorated with simple white flowers that floated gently in the low gravity. "I promise to always ask before I assume," Aldrich said, his voice rough with emotion. "To always listen when you speak. To never assume I know better than you do what's right for your life, your body, your future. I promise to learn what you need and provide it without resentment. To celebrate what you can do instead of mourning what you can't. Lyra's hands trembled in his. I promise to be honest about what I need, even when it's hard to ask. To ask for help when I need it and give it when you need it. To keep fighting to be more than anyone expects, including myself. To build a life where we all grow together, not despite our differences but because of them. The officiant smiled. By the authority vested in me by the Galactic Registry, I pronounce you married. You may seal your bond. They kissed, slow, careful, wonderingly. Emma tugged on Lyra's sleeve. Can I call you Mom now? She whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Yeah, Lyra said, voice breaking. You can call me Mom. 6 months later, Lyra published her thesis, now accepted by 3 major academic journals and translated into 12 languages. Dr. Nexia reopened her research program with Lyra as co-investigator, their first study identifying 47 other Aquarians who had been classified as defective when they were actually adapted in ways the embassy had never anticipated. The Aquarian embassy underwent massive reforms. Ambassador then retired to a research station on the edge of known space, where he spent his days documenting cases of suppressed genetic research, a kind of penance that would occupy him for the rest of his life. Years later, when Emma studied at the Galactic Academy, she wrote an essay that would be read by generations of students. My mother taught me that the most powerful force in the universe isn't gravity or fusion or the expansion of space itself. It's the courage to choose love when every system tells you it's impossible. It's the strength to see someone the way they are and decide they're perfect anyway. Lyra kept that essay in a frame beside her doctoral diploma, the one she earned in genetics and adaptive neurology, with a specialization in finding hidden potential in genetic variations others called defects. Every person she helped, every child she taught to see beyond the surface, was an echo of the day she'd sat invisible in the registry and a stranger had refused to look away. Sometimes in a universe of billions, it takes just one person refusing to look away to change everything. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply believing that different doesn't mean less. And sometimes the love everyone said was impossible becomes the foundation that changes the galaxy itself.